Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today we are continuing Book 3, with Chapter 2 of Book 3, which continues on the question of the theme of Book Three's regime. But he first went with, like we said in Chapter 1, he said, well, the city, but then the city then became the citizens, and now he's addressing the citizen a little bit. And he talked about the definition of the citizen. Now he's going to continue that concerning. He says, in chapter 2. It's a very short chapter, so it's gonna be quick. As a matter of usage, however, a citizen is defined as a person from a parent who are both citizens, and not just one, whether the father or the mother. And some go even further back, seeking that two or three or more generations of citizens of our pair. So therefore, okay, this is in Christian now. That what is a citizen? Well, some argue that it has to be both parents. But then even some argue that no, it must go back even further, not just not just one, but even further, uh, whether the father or mother, right? Not just one, but whether the father and mother are both citizens, right? And he goes, um, and then what else? That some seeking that two or three generations of citizens. But these being political and offhand definitions, some raise the question of how that third or fourth generation ancestor will have been a citizen, right? In other words, this is a very interesting point he makes about how is it. This is a political question, and how if someone who's been like three or four generations, how is that person a citizen? Maybe they weren't a citizen. Maybe that three or four generations ago they weren't. They were foreign or something, or that they didn't have citizens. In America, this was the question of the slaves, right? The slaves uh, um, weren't citizens, and once they were free, were they allowed to be? Were they now citizens? Their grandparent wasn't a citizen, so if we argue that we're going to have our parents citizens, must be citizens. Okay, that's what I mean. This is the question. This is a regime. Therefore, even this question is not. If the citizen is one born of citizens, that in itself is a function of a political decision. In other words, something about the given political community makes a decision about who is going to be a citizen, and therefore since that will vary in regime, therefore that's a regime question. It seems to me he's saying here. Now he says Gorgias of Linande, therefore, perhaps partly by way of raising a question and partly an irony, said that just as mortars are made by mortar makers, uh, and Lasserians are made by and so Lasserians are made by craftsmen, since some are them are lacerer makers, right? Lasserians are made by craftsmen. Now this is a note. Gorgias puns the word demigurgos, which both means craftsman and magistrate. Lycia was a town in Sicily. The occasion of the remark is unknown, but it would appear to have involved a wholesale enfranchisement of the non-citizen. In other words, and therefore he's making a pun of the term the magistrate. The magistrates demiurgos. Okay, this is both means two things. It's a pun on the word demiurgos, which means both craftsman, one who makes something, and the demiurgos was a magistrate in this place. The magistrate made everyone a citizen. Had just gave enfranchisement. Now, enfranchisement is the right. It is the status of citizen. Okay, and again, citizen is one who exercises decision and holds office, right? Decides on the matters of the city, right? Um, Gorgias is kind of putting a pun here. He says, well, there are people who make mortars, but there's also people who make citizens, citizens of Lasser makers. Okay, so in money sense, Gorgia is making a pun, but he's also hitting on something that whoever is ruling, they define, and the part the and therefore who rules is really who defines the regime. The regime defines who is ruling the regime. They define who is the citizen, the regime relative. In other words, and therefore this idea that who is a citizen can be made by the one. Therefore, not only do parents make the citizen in one sense, but a regime that says that only children of parents who are citizens can be that, or other regimes that will say no, you have to have you have to have your families have to be a citizen. You have to been three generations of citizens, right? Okay, this is a type of regime verification, a type of protea that will do this. Okay, the matter is simple. If they took part in the regime according to the definition that has been given, they were citizens. Or, at any rate, it is impossible that the definition from citizen father or mother should fit in the case of the first inhabitants or fathers. But then again, it's impossible that the first ones were citizens, the first inhabitants. The first inhabitants may have come from parents who weren't citizens. Okay, therefore this is that's why it's in one sense a kind of very interesting question: who becomes the citizen? Sometimes it can't, if you're creating a city and we're going to decide to do this from the first inhabitants of the city of a political thing. Well, you can't insist on that it's going to be 5 or 6 generations because they weren't. Okay, so therefore it's going to vary, and they may be at a different time, at a different point in that political community's history. The regime might say, well, wait a minute, we want to limit or control who is a citizen. In other words, the citizen who is a citizen is one who is going to exercise authority, and therefore it's therefore the city and its regime will define this in some sense. But perhaps more of a question is involved in the case of those who came to take part in the regime after the revolution. So now he raises the question of, well, what happens not about the question of what happens in the foundation of a city, right? Who is a citizen in that sense earlier, and he raises the problem of the people who found the regime, how they can be defined citizens, right? But then a more different question is what happens after a revolution, right? And he goes, who takes part? In other words, after the case of those came to take part in the regime after a revolution. For example, the citizens created in Athens by Cleinites after the expulsion of the tyrants, for he enrolled in the tribes many foreigners and alien slaves. Right. So therefore, after the removal of the peristites of families of tyrants that came up that emerged after Solon's democracy, but then there was this kind of decline, and then what happened was the democracy that all of a sudden that the people voted in the conflict eventually led to the rise of the people electing a tyrant, and the tyrant restored, ruled, and his children ruled for generations. That's we look at Book 5, a discussion of the tyrants. But then when Cleinistees restores the democracy, right? He brought he in the tribes. And the term tribes here is not tribes in the sense. In other words, the tribes in Athens was we call the term tribes, but they're not tribes. They are like political districts, political structures that he framed the democracy under. That people were different. It was a political classification. Therefore, and usually that therefore it divided this. Now let's look at footnote 7. I think this addresses that. The democratic reforms effected by Cleinistees were after the overthrow of the peristitid tyranny involved the abolitions of abolishing the original 4 tribes that Solon created, and creating 10 new ones in accordance to accommodate the new citizens. The text and the exact meaning of Aristotle's description here is controversial in that sense. In other words, the text and the exact meaning of Aristotle's description here is controversial in that sense. That Aristotle's kind of taking a particular view of this view of this, of that that he included foreigners and slaves here. In other words, the argument was that no, he didn't include foreigners here. They were already citizens. They were just excluded. And in other words, foreigners and alien slaves. This suggests that this is a dissolution of citizenship, where some would argue that no, he didn't dissolve it. So therefore, this is kind of the question here is, or maybe it's not Aristotle's doing this. It's the viewpoint of the tone of here, where if the first chapter was kind of democratic, in other words, if the first voice, I mean, this is chapter one, the definition of sin was very democratic. It had almost a democratic bias towards it. Now, chapter two, we get almost the opposite. It's like the definition of the earlier beginning of this chapter was, well, citizenship means something more than that. It means both parents. Well, not even both parents, but many parents. In other words, it's trying to distance, put all these criterias that would actually reduce the size of the citizen. So it has a kind of aristocratic or oligarchic tone. Okay, so it's almost like this chapter is written by someone different. So I talk about this in my book. I mentioned yesterday my book on book three from 2004, Aristotle's Best Regime, which deals with book three. I argue about that there is a dialogic character in the text. That there's not just it's not really an essay where there's consistent narrative and a consistent mind behind it. There's almost, because there's argument as well, this text has been edited and maybe there's too many hands here. I think now this is more, and this is like a lecture class. This is like Aristotle's presenting different, and sometimes he might be in chapter one. We have a democratic perspective. Now, in two, the citizen all of a sudden has the voice of an aristocrat or oligarch, more restrictive sense, right? And hence there's a kind of supposition that this increasing of the voting bases by they're going to add slaves and foreigners to it. Okay, this is kind of like the idea that we're doubting that any expansion of, therefore it's so therefore it may not be Aristotle's own position, but the tone of the position that's come through this chapter. And this is a big question about then the question of a revolution, right? Well, what was first democratic now became oligarchic of tone, right? There was a change. Now he talks about the change, right? He says that there is a citizen about this question, right? About the revolution happened. And the question is, what is about here? And he says the dispute about these things is not just over who's a citizen, but rather they are justly or unjustly so. So it's not only, therefore, the question of who's a citizen, who's not a citizen, is this not it's not a definition question, but it's also a question of justice. That is this person rightly a citizen? That we've had a citizen, a regime has changed, the revolution has happened. Now all of a sudden, people who weren't citizens are now citizens. Well, the question now also, this is a justice question. Are they justly so citizens? Are they really should be citizens, or is this a corruption of the regime? Okay, this is again this deviation. We have a deviation of the regime in that sense. I'm gonna move this, and then we're looking at the end of the thing. He goes, so therefore, the dispute is not only about who is the definition, defining what the citizen is, but also whether they're justly or unjustly, as the debate goes, right? And yet further question might be raised as to whether one who is not justly a citizen is a citizen at all. The assumption being that the unjust and the false amount to the same thing. So therefore, something who's not a citizen, in other words, this is the claim. That another question is someone who's not justly a citizen, not a citizen. Assuming that what he says here, the definition of being something unjust, is also false. So almost there's a kind of in many ways there is kind of an anti-democratic or expansionistic definition of what the citizen is. In that sense, it wants to reduce who's a citizen. It's aristocratic or oligarchic in its tendency, the thrust here. But since we But since we also see certain unjust rulers, whom we assert do rule, but unjustly, and since citizen is defined as a kind of office, for someone who shares in that kind of office is citizen, as we said. It is clear that these two must be admitted as. So, even, in other words, he then dismisses the claim of the unjust. In other words, someone who may argue this, but that's not true because there's a ruler can be unjust. Now, Aristotle then gives a response to this. This is where Aristotle comes in. Aristotle answers the question of the justice. Some might argue that just the unjust citizen, the justice of the citizenry being that, and that then an unjust citizen is not. But Aristotle then says, listen, they're unjust rulers. Does it make them not rulers? You know, they're still rulers. And what is a citizen? Is one who shares is the ruler. So in this case, it doesn't matter if they're just or unjust, as there can be unjust rulers, there can be unjust citizens. They're citizens nevertheless, as they're rulers nevertheless. And that's how he ends it. That it's clear that these two must be admitted as be citizens, the unjust ones. Therefore, Aristotle ends on the idea that this is kind of this. He kind of he answers the oligarch's position by saying that even these two must be citizens. Now, so, therefore, this is how we end the chapter. Um, if you have any questions, please put them down there, and I will kind of answer them when I see them. If you liked it, like it, and share it with a friend, and get other people to subscribe to this. Didn't like it, you can say don't like it, and say why you didn't like it. But again, share if you liked it, and share it, subscribe, get friends to subscribe, share it on social media in that sense. Tell other people that hey, this doing Aristotle's politics. If you're interested in Aristotle's politics, go read it. Um, you can you can follow me on social media below. Um, the links are below. My social media present. I'm mostly Facebooker because I do treat it as my thought section. Another thing is, if you want to help, as I mentioned, I've discovered that YouTube is charging, Google's charging us if we get too big. And on my side, I've had to pay. I had to buy the new plan. I said, okay, I did the minimum, but then even the minimum wasn't enough. I had to go to the next size plan, but even they're pushing you to do more, because if otherwise I have to kill videos, and I don't want to kill the old videos. I might. I'm thinking of redoing the from criticisms of some friends. I might redo the um, Machiavelli again, but I didn't do the similar. I didn't do the text before. I just read it, and people say the text they'd rather see the text again. So I might do that this summer, or after I do this, do it one again. But and I would like to do I have to finish this whole politics. That's one thing. Then after that, I will do the Machiavelli maybe as a quickly because that's quickie. That's only like so many chapters. That's a short one, Prince. Um, and I want to do Montesquieu. That will be a monster. Montesquieu will be a monster. Um, I might do it too in my class. I'm doing a class this fall, the spring, in the springs, which is in Poland. The spring starts in February. The spring summer semester. I'm going to be doing a course on the Federalist combination of Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws and the Federalist Papers. So maybe I will record it and cheat and then post it like that. So or it's not going to be reading it like this, but we'll see. Um, but that's why am I talking this way? Because if you want to help the channel do these things, and being a patron would be good. Subscribe, star, Patreon, whatever way. It would help. Um, I'm going to be doing it. Okay, I'm using my money. I've been doing this. Everything. I've expanded. I actually paid for the expansion so that it's gonna. It's not atrociously expensive, but and buying books are getting more tough because of inflation. So, but if you want to help, you can subscribe to our Patreon, or you can buy 'em if you don't want to buy. No, you can buy my book or Christmas. Okay, some people will look at this year outside of the time it's done release. Or I made this as Christmas is coming soon. You'd be seeing this release. This episode should be released just before Christmas week. If you want to buy someone a Christmas present, you can order them a young student or someone who's going to do study the politics, or a friend who might read the politics. You can get them the book by Lulu, or you can buy it at Amazon, or one of the online many places you can get this. If you buy it there, however, I don't get all the money. If you buy it at Lulu, I get whatever the publisher makes, the bookstore makes. Lulu will, the problem with Lulu is that it just charges more it charges for delivery. Lulu, I went to Lulu originally. It was it was going to be published as a textbook or text, just a work text study book by a relatively academic publisher, a a textbook firm, but they wanted to sell it for $100, and I said no, no, I wanted to make it more reasonable, so I went with Lulu. It's it is a text. It is it outlines. It's not a commentary. It's not interpretation. It is just. It's not just mere summary. It offers chapters, outlines, thing, outlines, structures, diagrams of things. As you go around reading the book of the politics, I have notes and a bibliography that expands on each chapter, a section like that. The bibliography is at the end. It's not mine. Asked someone to use it because when I use it for my the study guide. Why reinvent the wheel? And I asked them if I could use it, and they said yes. I did add some things to it. I did add some different things I thought was important, but he didn't add in it. I know he's just publishing. He's doing a new article on the scholarship again, repeating what he's done here. Every 2 or 3 years, he publishes a kind of update of the scholarship. So I think this year he's been in Cambridge. He's went to Cambridge University as a kind of fellow there. Lucky him. I never got the fellowship offer. Boo, 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 boo. I've been in exile now in Poland for 20 years. So, that's it. I'm going to shut up. Have a good day. That's been long enough. That was maybe 20, 30 minutes, shorter than the other one. Okay, take care, and I will see you next time when we look at next chapter, chapter 3.